In this video, we're going to look at JavaScript and loops. Now remember, any programming language can be broken down into the same 5 fundamental concepts. That is creating output, using variables, control structures, loops, and functions. So this is the 4th one of those concepts, using loops to repeat blocks of code. In this video, we are going to look specifically at the for loop. The for loop is a loop designed to interact a specific number of times. So let's get right into it. Let's create a new file and throw in our standard tags here. And a title. And our script tag. Right, so a for loop is meant to execute a block of code a certain number of times. So let's create a line of code. And we'll start by testing that. So if I open up that file, we get a paragraph. Now let's say that I want to repeat that paragraph 6 times. I'm going to start a loop here, and I'll get back to the contents in the brackets in a sec. I'm going to open up my block of code using the curly bracket and close right there. So this for loop, we're going to make it execute 6 times, is going to repeat this block of code 6 times. The way a for loop repeats code is you need to create a counter. It's a variable that's going to be used to keep track of how many iterations the loop has executed. So we're going to create a variable called I, set it to 0. I is the common name for that variable. I believe it just stands for increment. We are then going to, just like an if statement, specify the condition for this loop continuing to execute. So if you look back to if statements and you provide a condition for when that if statement is going to execute, it's similar to the for loop, except this is the condition. It's going to keep checking over and over again. And as long as that condition is true, it's going to keep executing and repeating that loop. And then finally, we increment our counter. So just to review those 3 pieces again, we define a counter. This counter variable is going to be used to keep track of how many iterations our loop has executed. This piece of code here is executed once, only once, before the loop starts. Not before each loop, but before the whole looping begins. Second piece here, this is our condition. The loop is going to check that condition each time it starts to repeat. If that condition is true, then repeat the block. If the condition is true, repeat the block, and it'll do that until the condition is false. And this piece here modifies or increments our counter. That is executed once after each iteration. So check the condition, execute the loop, modify our counter. Check the condition, execute our code, modify the counter. So in this case, it's going to run 6 times. So if I refresh my page, we get 6 paragraphs. So to help kind of see how the loop is working, I'm going to take my I variable and add it to my paragraph. So if I save and refresh, you can see my counter is going up by 1 each time it outputs a paragraph. Likewise, you can also use this counter for other purposes. So for example, let's create a loop, and I'm going to list my headings using my counter variable. So I'm going to inject my counter into a couple places here, once in the actual content itself, and then also into the open and close heading tags. And I forgot plus sign right here, and save. And now if I refresh, we have an error message, and I forgot a second plus sign here. So save and refresh. All right, so we have 6 paragraph and 6 headings. Now notice the counter starts at 0 and goes to 5. And notice my first heading is an H0, which does not exist. So let's take our counter here, and instead of starting at 0, I'm going to start at 1. And instead of stopping before 6, I'm going to include 6. And if I save and refresh, now we get 6 paragraph and 6 sample headings using our H1 through H6 tags. If I open up my developer tools and look at my HTML, you can see there is 6 well-formatted paragraphs and 6 well-formatted headings. Now, where loops are practical, like I've mentioned in some of the previous videos, one of the most crucial concepts when learning code, especially with the internet, is writing code that will fetch content from a list, either a database, from an API, from an external XML or JSON file. We fetch that data, we loop through that data, and output that content. So if you think of any major website, Amazon, Twitter, Instagram, it's just lists of blocks of code being repeated. You take a block of code that outputs an Instagram post and you repeat it for every post. So let's try tackling a little piece of that concept. So I don't usually paste code in here while I'm going through these videos, but no one wants to watch me create a long array. So I'm just going to paste a quick array in here and fix the tabbing. So here is our sample list. We have an array called links. It's just storing some information on 3 coding resources. So we have W3 Schools in slot 0, Codecademy, and that should be Code Academy, and the W3 website. Now, let's say I want to output those 3 records. So I'm going to create a loop. I'm going to reuse my I counter. And I'm going to run while I is less than 3. And I'm going to increment my variable by 1 each iteration. Now, if I go document.write, and let's output from our links variable slot 0, and we want our link name. All right, so if I save that and refresh, all right, and we're not getting any output, so let's just check our console. We're getting in a variable that an error that link is not defined, so I just forgot an S on my links variable here. So let's try that again. Save and refresh. And there's our 3 links. Now at this point you'll notice they're all my first link. It's all the same link. So if I wanted to output W3 schools, Codecademy, and then W3. The piece I need to change here is the 0. So instead of putting a 0, I'm going to use my counter. And as my counter changes, 0, 1, 2, it'll change which name it's outputting. 0, 1, or 2. So let's refresh, and now I'm getting all 3 link names. And let's wrap that with an h2 tag. And refresh, and I'm getting my 3 headings in a h2 heading. Let's output my description, and we'll wrap that in a paragraph. So from our links array, slot I, description, and then a close paragraph. And then finally our link. Now I do find when learning code, people often will code their link something like this when first trying to put forgetting all sorts of quotes here. So when coding your first link inside a loop, I often find people will code something like this. And the reason is you look at how the H2 was done and how the paragraph was done, and you kind of just apply the same thing to a link. Now remember that a link in HTML is formatted differently than a paragraph or a heading. If I save this and refresh, and let's look at my HTML, you can see that is not a well-formatted link element. So remember, when you're creating HTML using JavaScript, it always has to follow your HTML rules. So for example, a link needs an href, inside the href, we need our URL, so I'm going to reference my array a second time. And let's just break this into 2 lines here so it's easy to read. So open my a tag, href equals quote. I then have the contents of my array, the URL. Then I close my quote and close my bracket. The contents of the URL again. This time this is the part the visitor will click on, and then close my a tag. And then finally, just to split up each link, we'll throw an HR after each one. So if I refresh, there's my 3 links, and if we look at the HTML, we have heading, paragraph, link, HR. And then that is repeated 3 times. Now the one last thing we'll change here is I currently have 3 links. However, in the future, these links could be coming from a database, an API, some sort of external list. We want to write our code so that it can adapt to the content that we are working with. So if we have 1 link, this code should work. If we have 10 links, this code should work. Now, right now our code is set to loop 3 times. So instead of putting the number 3 there, I'm going to take our links array, and I'm going to repeat this loop based on the length of that array. So the length of that array is 3, so this loop will run 3 times. And if I save and take out one of these links, it works. And if I put that link back in, it works. So that loop is now adjusting based on the size of that array.